Hello, my name is cjrhen, and today I'm going to be showing you how to work with drum parts in Dorico. This video will cover slash voices with both stems and without stems, slash regions, and percussion voices because they're a little bit different than how we've been dealing with them with other instrument parts such as piano or guitar. Before we get started configuring our drum set, doing all the settings, and inputting notes, let me just talk about the philosophy of drum parts in Dorico and how it differs from Finale and Sibelius. So the big difference, and I've been talking about this throughout all my videos, is that there is always an official way to do something in Dorico, whereas Finale and Sibelius, mostly Sibelius speaking from my experience, is built around workarounds and third-party plugins to achieve things that are natively supported in Dorico. One example that specifically comes to mind for me is working with cues and drum parts in Sibelius. When I was doing that in Sibelius, I actually had to download a plugin that would allow me to input some rhythm and then convert that to a cue. Essentially, these little notes here that you're seeing, my cue notes on this drum part, had to be individually drawn, individually changed to that size, as well as moved above the staff. Ultimately, I got very good looking results in Sibelius, but if I ever had to make an edit, it could quickly become somewhat of a nightmare to be editing this drum part with these cues because it wouldn't always remember that I was editing in this voice or input in that voice, and it would change it back to like the full size or move it on the staff. This is in contrast to Dorico, which is a huge time saver with cues. Here's a super quick example of how Dorico deals with cues. I'll break this down further later in the video, but I just want to demonstrate how much of a time saver it is. So all I did is select somewhere on my drum staff down at the bottom there, and I'm going to make a range selection. I'm going to press Shift U to enter the cue input mode, and let's say I want to put that brass cue that I see up there in my trombones. I'm just going to type trombone. I'm going to click Tab because it's the first thing that's there, and it will automatically draw that cue for me. And notice it automatically put it above the staff. It automatically changed the size. And if I were to continue writing in the staff, let's say I delete this slash region here and I just start drawing, it won't affect anything happening with that cue because it's its own separate element, and it's also influenced by what's written in the staff up here. Let's say I change this region here and I move it over. My cue is automatically reflected in my drum part because it's actually dependent on the part I assigned it to. I'm able to rename it to whatever I want. I can show and hide the articulations very easily. Ultimately, cues are just amazing in Dorico, and this is my main reason why I actually switched from Sibelius to Dorico a couple years ago. To get started working with our drum parts, I'm going to actually jump to a blank project. I'm going to show you how to set up the drum kit so that you get the slash notations that you see here on the screen as something available that you can write on the staff. I'll show you how to work with the colored voices, which is why all my note heads are colored right now. Then I will jump back to this big band score as well as some other big band scores so I can show you writing some drum parts with some actual context. So here's a blank project I just created. I inserted a piano and an upright bass, and now I'm going to insert a basic drum kit, and to do that we add a player. We have a couple different options regarding layouts that we can insert into our score in Dorico. You can find them down here in the bottom left hand corner. We have add single player, add section player, or add ensemble. For the most part with jazz scores, we're just going to be working with add single player right here. Go ahead and click that. Let's type drum, and you'll see we get a whole bunch of options with different types of percussionists. We're going to insert drum set basic because I think it's the bare minimum that we like to work with, especially for big band and combo scores. Select it and select add. Now that we have a drum set player added to our score, I'm not going to mess with the formatting or the engraving or the order of anything. I'm just going to add my slash voices both with and without stems to my drum set. Note this is a little different than slash voices and how they worked with our piano and upright bass. Drum set gets its own treatment for voices and for slash voices. To get into editing our drum kit, come to the players panel over here on the left. You might have to expand it and find your drum set and click the drop down. Notice this is a player, and all these other players also have a separate listing for their instrument under it. You might think that's redundant, but what this is actually for is having multiple instruments assigned to a player. This is practical, for example, if you have alto 1, that might have an alto sax instrument as well as a flute instrument, so you can draw it all within the same player, and you can have those cues of when to switch all make sense. For our drum set, that simply means we just have a drum set instrument assigned onto our drum set player. To officially access our drum set editor, we're going to click these three dots here to see the properties of this individual instrument, and you will see Edit Percussion Kit. Pull that up and you'll see a staff reflected on the screen. This blown up staff reflects where different things appear when we draw them on our drum kit. For example, here's our center line, and we notice kick drum is on our first space on this, whereas our hi-hat pedal is below our bottom line. What we can do now is add different things we need to this drum kit so we can access it when we're writing our drum parts. To easily add our slash voices, both with and without stems, Dorico makes it extremely easy for us, and you can see them right here where it says slashes. Select the first one with stems and the second one without stems. It automatically assigns it to the center line of our drum kit so it appears in the correct place, and we can adjust its location later if we need to on a case-by-case basis. Make sure you click apply if you haven't already, or if it isn't applied, click close, and we are officially done setting up our drum kit and we can start writing. So now we're going to jump back to this big band score, and this is the shout chorus of my song Don't Ask Twice. And down here we have our drum part, and we're just going to be filling out the first 8 to 16 bars to get an idea for some of the notation abilities we have now. So first things first, I actually want to redraw the pickup into the downbeat of our shout chorus, which is right here on bar 132. Right now I have eighth note triplets notated with slashes, and I think they're a little ambiguous, and I want to be more clear. I want them to be playing the snare in the low tom on those and crescendoing throughout just for that style I'm going for. So I'm going to clear out this bar, and I'm going to enter note input mode, either with Shift N or enter. Now what's important with our percussion parts is we like to pick the notes with our arrow keys. All my finale users are probably like, what? We can use the arrow keys to pick notes? For the way the percussion works, it's typically how we go between voices. So notice it's changing my selection of what voice I'm actually going to be inputting, or more specifically, what instrument on the kit. I'm going to go to snare, and I'm going to now be able to engage my triplet into this voice. The way voices and percussion work is the voice is tied to a specific instrument, and those instruments are stuck to those specific voices unless we change it otherwise. Our slashes are in their own specific voice, and they are independent, so that's why I am going and selecting the snare drum. Now to draw the eighth note triplets, we engage our eighth note. I'm also going to engage tuplet input mode, which is the semicolon. I'm going to click 3 and enter, and now we're all good to just enter as many eighth note triplets as we want in these voices. I'm going to play this on my MIDI keyboard. I recommend you just get very used to where things are on the MIDI keyboard for your drum kit. It's honestly extremely fast, and as someone who does a ton of programming in a DAW, it's extremely familiar for me to just be working on a MIDI keyboard with a drum set. So now I'm going to play C and A for my snare and low tom, and I'm going to enter this throughout the whole bar. Once that is all input, I just want to quickly break down some of the other options we have in regards to our percussion voices. So I'm just going to select this whole bar, and let's right click and look at our context menu here. Notice we have voices, but now we also have a special one called percussion. We have two options here, Legend for all instruments, which will just simply write out all the instruments available to us, or Legend for sounding instruments based on your selection. I select that. It automatically writes snare drum and floor tom. Let me undo that, and let's keep looking through this context menu just a little bit. Back to the percussion, I just right clicked and went to percussion. We also have control to change what voice these are going into. This is where you access your voices for the percussion. It is separate from the voices menu down here, which is for our other instruments. Percussion gets its own special treatment. I now want to put 2 slashes on the downbeat of the shout chorus in my drums. This is basically to say I want them to play those hits that the whole band has, including the other parts of the rhythm section, but I don't necessarily want them to be playing specific drums, and I want them to be open to interpretation and maybe put a cymbal crash there, and then they can get into the groove afterwards, just straight to a swing. To do that, we just have to engage our note input mode if you're not already there, and make sure we're at our downbeat of our first bar of our shout chorus. This is really simple. All we have to remember is our slash voices are input on the middle of our staff, the middle line, and the percussion staff in Dorico is always correlated to a treble clef staff. That's simply going to be B. Now, if you want to make rhythmic alterations like we did by adding the triplet, we have to make sure we have our voice selected with our note input caret right there. But if we just want to draw basic values, we can actually just play the note on our MIDI keyboard, again, which is B, or type B on our typing keyboard with our rhythmic value selected, and now we can input those slashes. It automatically changes the voice, automatically changes the note head. Everything is set because those slashes are their own independent voice, and they automatically respond to our MIDI input and rhythm we give them. I'm now out of note input mode, and I'm just looking at the pickup bar and at my downbeat right here of my shout chorus. If you notice, there is a strange rest here. Now this is where a huge difference between Dorico and Finale and Sibelius comes in. In Dorico, we don't just hide rests, we remove them. What that means is, unlike my experience with Sibelius specifically, everything there was done by either hiding something, changing something, or basically an operation that technically wasn't just supported. It was a lot of extra work to make something look like this. Whereas in Dorico, we have these slash voices, we have our other drums. To hide this rest, they make it as simple as selecting the bar with the rest that you want to get rid of, come up to edit, and we're going to click remove rest. Do you see that right here? This button will be your best friend for percussion and rhythm section voices. It automatically removes that while preserving our parts exactly as they were. Let's continue working on this part. I'm not going to specifically notate a swing rhythm here because I already did it early in the piece, and I feel like I only need to do it once per section where it happens. For example, this piece has a hi-hat shuffle swing, and it also has a ride swing. So the piece opens with the hi-hat shuffle swing that I show in the very beginning of the piece, and I only show slashes as long as I'm using that variety of my swing with a text cue. But when I end up getting to my ride swing, I will show the ride swing one time, and then from there on out, I will only use text cues to note that it's happening there. That applies to this section because I am going to be in ride swing here, and I'm going to be putting cues on my parts, and occasionally there's going to be rhythmic interruptions such as bar 136, where I want the drummer to hit a very hard kick drum on beat 1 while the band hits a beat of silence. Let's work out inputting that whole drum part up through these 4 bars as I just described. First, to input my slash region, I'm just going to select my first rest there, and I'm going to hold shift while clicking over these couple bars because, as I said, I need to change what I'm doing in bar 136 to show a heavy kick on the downbeat. With this selected, we now have to input a rhythmic slash region. We can do that with shift R and type slash. The next figure to enter is that kick drum and our hit on beats 1 and 2 of bar 136 that go along with the rhythm section. Simply, I'm going to enter note input mode, and I'm going to make sure my quarter note is selected with 6 on our typing keyboard. And as I've been talking about the MIDI keyboard, I'm going to press F for my kick drum. You can also do that on your typing keyboard. And I'm going to put a B for my slash with a stem because I want them to play anything on this hit. If you wanted to specifically notate something like a crash, we could also do that by knowing our notes and where they are correlated to on our MIDI keyboard. I can access my crash with an A above the staff. I'm going to make sure I leave that as a slash just for my purposes, and now we're going to fill out the remaining couple bars here with just rhythmic slashes. So this time I just made a group selection with my mouse. I clicked one, held shift while I clicked the other one at the end, and it made that range. I'm still going to use my popover with shift R and type slash. With that fully filled out drum part here, all we have to do is work out our rests, and we have to add our cues. First things first, we need to get rid of our extra rest that we see in bar 136. We already discussed how easy that is. Just pick that bar, come up to edit, and click remove rest. Just like that, it's cleared out and it looks super clean. Now I want to put in some specific cues, specifically from my lead trumpet part, since everyone's playing the same rhythms and they're leading the section into my drum part. I briefly touched on cues earlier on this video, and now I'm just going to dive a little deeper into it and make sure we get a thorough understanding. Here's something that I think would be good to add a cue in my drum parts is these 8th note upbeat hits in our instruments. Let's just quickly listen to what that sounds like. So that's something a drummer would love to pick up on. Let me show you how to input that into our drums. As I discussed earlier, it's extremely easy to put in these cues. Come down to our drum part, and we're going to make a range selection by selecting our downbeat of where this cue is happening, what bar this is happening. And I'm going to hold Control or Shift while selecting the last beat of where this cue occurs. We click Shift U to input a cue, and I'm going to type trumpet just so I can access my trumpet parts. Notice trumpet 1's right at the top there. It really doesn't matter what we pick since they're all playing the same thing. I'm just going to click Tab, which is shorthand for selecting the first thing in that list. Notice we automatically get some cues drawn, but we have to clean these up now. Quick disclaimer, if you're not seeing your cues show up, it's because we have to enable cues to be shown in our score layout. So with me, click Control or Command Shift L to enter layout options. Make sure we have our score selected in our layouts over here. Simply type cues into the search and you will find cues with a checkbox for show cues. It's enabled in mine. Make sure it's enabled for you and click apply and click close, and now you should be able to see your cues if you were not seeing them. Let's dive right into editing this cue so it shows up the way we like to see it. First things first, I don't like how it says trumpet 1. I'd prefer it just says ensemble. To do that, I'm going to change its start text and I'm going to do ENS dot, which is just shorthand for ensemble, and to me that's signaling that the whole ensemble is going to be playing this rhythm and that the drummer can also pick up on it. The next thing I don't like about this cue is it's showing the articulations. We can simply remove that by looking through our properties down here and finding show articulations. Let's enable that option, leave it unchecked, and now they're all gone, automatically drawn. The next thing I would like to do is shorten the range of this. I want it to just be showing up in this one bar for now. To do that with our cue selected, we have to be using Shift, Alt, or Shift option if you're on Mac in our arrow keys to be adjusting the length. You can also grab that little circle there with your mouse, but I think it's just way easier to use the keyboard. Notice when you're doing this action, sometimes it takes a second for it to load where you're doing it because you're actually redrawing everything and your whole score is updating. So just be patient when you select your range there. Let's explore some of the other options a little more. One thing we might like to have, instead of showing regular note heads, we can make them into rhythmic slashes. This is also as simple as coming down here to our properties view and turning on use rhythmic slashes and checking the box next to it. Just like that, everything is changed to rhythmic slashes. I personally prefer the note heads for cues like this, so I leave that unchecked, just my personal preference. While we're working with cues, you'll notice that Dorico automatically detected this was a drum set part, so when it created the cue, it automatically enabled rhythmic cue, which you can see right here, right? Rhythmic cue means it's automatically drawing them without notes on the staff. It just puts it above the staff. For drums, obviously, we leave it as rhythmic cue, and we even have the option to change its distance, which is slightly under my keyboard here, and we can move it up and we can move it down depending if we have a hi-hat written there, we want to rate the cue above the hi-hat. All of it's automatic. We don't have to manually change anything. We can do these bulk operations. While that is an example of the rhythmic cue, you'll notice in my piano part, I actually have my lead trumpet shown as a regular cue here, and I did that so the piano knows to voice below the lead. I provide them the rhythmic stabs I want them to be playing, and I provide slashes where I want them to be comping, but I also put the lead part in there as cues. This cue is also a cue part just like we did for the drums, but it's not a rhythmic cue. It's just a good old regular cue, and I toggled what I was showing and not showing. Notice I turned off show articulations and show slurs because it's not as relevant for the pianist, and they just need to see the notes so they know what they're playing. And I did that simply by selecting my region and drawing my cues. Pay close attention here because if I actually change a note in my trumpet 1, say this, let me just lower an octave, something dramatic so we can see it get reflected in our piano part. Look at that. Here I lower this note an octave and it's automatically reflected in our cue. The last thing I want to cover is making a custom line just to say drum fill, just in a note you want the drummer to be filling through a bar. It's honestly very easy because Dorico also has a full robust option of lines, and we can make custom lines that we can reinsert later. For now, I'm just going to manually show you how to make one that you can copy and paste. Let's select our range here, and I'm going to come over to the right hand side toolbar, and we're going to look for the lines, which is this little line with an arrow. that says lines. Let's pick that, and I like to do dashed just because it's not quite as bulky looking when the page prints. Let me select it, and notice we have these options down here in our properties. I'm going to change the text to say dr.fill for drum fill. It's in the middle of the bar, and we probably want to change the placement so it's at the beginning. Here, I'm going to change the text position to centered, just where it was. That's where I like it to start. I'm going to change the text placement to start, but look, it has a little dash before it that looks a little awkward. We can get rid of that by changing our start or end gap. I set it to 0, and now we get a line coming right off of this and going and ending over here. I'm going to come to engrave just so you can quickly see the length of this. It just wasn't printing correctly. It's cornered off at the end to show the end of the fill. Just like that, we now have a drum fill line. I want to wrap up here today, but let's recap all of the different techniques that we worked with. First, we understood how we can add slashes to our drum parts and use the drum set editor or the percussion kit editor to make our drum set with all the instruments we need. While we only added slashes, you can add other things there such as ride bells, and you can trigger what MIDI note they actually play so you can have more detailed playback. We also covered how to work with some voices in the percussion part and that we have to toggle between them on our keyboard. We recapped working with triplets in this. We worked with putting slashes with stems on our drum set. We worked with mixing multiple different types of voices in one bar, shown in bar 136 with a kick on the downbeat and a slash with a stem on beat 2. We covered working with lines and how we can customize them to our liking. We used one of the most powerful features in Dorico, which is remove rest, and that is your best friend for editing any type of rhythm section instrument that has multiple voices going on at once. And most importantly, we worked with cues, which are the most powerful thing about Dorico in my opinion. Cues are what made me switch from Sibelius. I was sick of using third-party plugins to draw cues and then trying to edit them and having them automatically get redrawn and resized. In Dorico, it's just so intuitive how cues work and how much power the user has over them. Overall, this was just a really quick dive into the drums so you can hopefully get started and understand the tools available to you. Know that in this video and in general, I haven't really covered anything about playback. I plan to start making some videos on playbacks and making some mock-ups a little more in detail coming after I cover some of the more basic techniques about writing and inserting in visuals, because I think it's more important, especially notation software, to focus on the visuals before we get to the playback and mock-up stage. Thank you for watching my video, and thank you for all the support I'm getting. I'm very into making these just super educational instructional videos. I've been loving teaching. I have more coming out next week, and if you have any requests, questions, comments, please reach out, put them in the comments. You can email me. I'm here to help you, and so is our community. Don't forget to leave a like and subscribe, and thank you for watching the video.